I'm Babby. I'm a head of skills of Film London. Just a bit of the background myself, work in the industry, film industry, animation and games as well, for 20 years this week. And currently working at Film London over the 2 years and a half, last 2 years and a half, focusing on skills development, shortage occupation, and developing opportunities for the people in order to get to the film, TV, animation, games, post-production, and VFX. We have a fantastic guest here today for you all to talk about how storyboarding brings animation to life. Talking slightly about people background in storyboarding and animation and filmmakers. We have quite a diverse group of people in terms of the work that they do. So hope you enjoy these as well. So I'm trying to not talk too much. I'm going to pass the opportunities to our wonderful guests. But let's start by introduction first. I'm going to go to the alphabetic order. So Chris, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about what you do and what your history is? Yeah.
Hello, yeah, I'm Chris Shepherd. I've done a lot of things. I've been a director, a writer, producer, and directed a lot of films. Done a lot of stuff with my films. I've done a lot of stuff which is like mixed media. I've done a lot of TV comedy with shows like Big Train, and I worked on Nathan Barley, and so I've done stuff like that. But more recently, I've just done my first graphic novel. So I've sort of gone from being like a writer, a director in film into a graphic novel. So it's my first graphic novel. I can get it out. I do a plug, Anfield Road, and yeah, so that's. My debut graphic novel. So I'm a really basically a storyteller. I'll use whatever means I can to tell a story, and I'm also a stage leader at Central St Martin's on the MA Character Animation course. So shall I pass over to Rory?
Please do.
Sure. Hi everyone. I'm an animator, director, screenwriter. I've made short films that I've written and storyboarded myself and animated myself. I also do sort of commissions and work on directing various short form projects. But yeah, more recently I've moved into sort of screenwriting, long form TV projects and trying to get sort of some live action comedy projects off the ground. So, like Chris, it's kind of a bit of a mix here and there. I enjoy sort of doing everything. I think that's what animation's great for, is you can kind of be quite multidisciplinary in your work because it involves so many different ways of storytelling. And I also teach at the RCA and at CSM with Chris part-time as well.
Excellent.
Ellie?
Great. Thank you, Rory. So my name's Ellie Land. I'm an animation director, and now I've sort of moved into immersive content. So working with animation in VR environments, but also sort of live interaction environments and projection mapping. So the sort of area that I'm kind of mostly interested in is animated documentary. So I tend to work a lot with people, and I don't particularly script. I tend to work from interviews. So I work with sound first, really, I would say. And yeah, I also teach. Currently, I teach as a part-time lecturer at Teesside University and at Northumbria University. And yeah, that's me.
Excellent. Thank you very much. As I mentioned, very diverse. You do guys everything, really. So covering everything, which is very nice, from writing graphic novels to animation to filmmaking to teaching. Excellent. So let's start by the first question. As I mentioned you before as well, I'm going to ask a question. Please chip in. Try to keep it as a conversation as well. And then we have some times at the end for the Q&A that people are going to send us to the chat. Starting by the first question, during your own creative processes that you do, I'm not talking about doing a storyboarding for anyone else, just for your own processes. Do you do a storyboarding? And what do you think about the process of it? Is it beneficial for you? Is it helping you to focus? Is it helping you to see differently?
Yeah, I'll go first if that's okay. Yeah, I would say, that was a really good question to start with because it made me really think about that sort of, when you start a project. And I tend to have like a new sketchbook every time I start a project, and I will always thumbnail ideas. So thinking about it, I think I naturally think sequentially. So yeah, storyboarding right from the beginning is kind of there for me in that sort of thumbnailing process.
So
Yeah, or shall I go next? Yeah, yeah. So well, I'm sort of for me, I feel like when it depends what type of storyboard it is as well. You know, you get some storyboards where you go say, you go and pitch to an ad agency or to a broadcaster, and then you'd have a storyboard that like sells the project. Is one way, but for myself, I tend to like whenever I do a project, I'm like Ellie. I have a little sketchbook, and like this is like what I tend to do is the thumbnails, do really fast thumbnails to get it down. I tend to start with the script, then do thumbnails. And then, but what I do is if I'm doing my own project or making a film or increasingly, because things are so low budget, what I'll do is I always try to get them on a timeline as fast as I can.
Mm,
And so is now what I do is I tend to just go, I might have little thumbnails like that in the book, but then I'll sort of go straight to the animatic, and then I'll tend to sell projects using animatics or show the animatic because for two reasons. One is because the money's tight, so you can turn it over quick, but also you get into the solution quicker where you're seeing it moving,
mm.
and I find that useful. So that's how I tend to come at it.
excellent.
Yeah, so I'm very similar that if it's for somebody else, then there's the role of the storyboard is a bit different, I think, because it is a communication tool and it's kind of getting getting everybody on board with your ideas. So you have to spend a bit more time smartening up. But for my own projects, I'm quite messy and I don't even have a sketchbook. It's just like stacks of random shit. But like I find that's helpful for my brain, I think, to get stuff out there. But then bringing it on the timeline as soon as possible. And most of the work I do is sort of dialogue driven or sound led. So that helps as well in a way that I can kind of have an edit of the film with the sound and just chuck pictures at it until it's coming in. I want it to be something I can watch as soon as possible and
Mm.
get a sense of timing.
Excellent. Just a quick follow-up question on that. When you do the storyboarding, do you think it's helping you to amend the story while you are doing the storyboarding? Do you write the story, think about the story, and do the storyboarding first, or you do it at the same time sometimes, or sometimes you just do sketches and then make a story based on the sketches?
I think all different projects are all really different as well, aren't they? Like sometimes I think making a storyboard, if I'm shooting a live action film, I find it quite useful to say, this is the shot I'm looking at, because a picture can tell 1,000 words, can't it, or whatever, and I find that quite useful. But sometimes I just do those thumbnails, and I think they're more psychological for me, just to make it exist in my mind, but then after time I throw them away anyway or change them or.
Yes.
Yeah. Sometimes I might do those thumbnails like when you can draw on your phone with your finger and like it might just literally look like that and I'll send it to an animator I might be working with and go, this is what I want, but I have to explain it at the same time because it's not that clear. But just even that little bit of mark making and an explanation from me kind of helps get across what I'd like to happen. But I also work with sound first a lot as well. And so edit the sound first, and then I start to do the thumbnails. But then that might have an effect on the edit of the sound as I'm sort of doing that. So I suppose yeah, I think the process of storyboarding is a thinking tool as well. So you probably go at it with an idea of what you think you want, but actually once you start that process of thumbnailing and you think, especially if you're working with sound, you might think, well, I've actually got like 20 seconds to get this sequence down. But as I'm thinking it through, you need to maybe kind of change it a little bit. But it's that sort of fits with that that question you have later about AI as well, where you were asking like, do we use AI as part of the storyboarding process? And it is something that I have experimented with, but what I found was it felt like it took away the thinking process. So I kind of, even though it was useful to like have something immediately there, it actually didn't solve the problem of telling the story through the visuals, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because I agree in a way that the storyboards for a personal project are about me figuring out every possible idea, and that's not something I would want to offload to somebody else or an AI even. I understand it might be useful if you need to render in a very specific way the ideas you've already had, but I don't see the point of doing that for when you're the one who's going to take those images and flesh it out. But yeah, of course, like storyboarding and writing, they kind of it's still part of the writing process in a way. Like I usually start with words, or if it's a documentary, it might be interviews, but having something there to inspire the visuals, and then those visuals might actually then change how you've written some bits or completely change the edit. Or I might leave a space where I know there won't be any dialogue or voiceover, and I want to have like a 30-second sequence that's a bit more loose, and I know I'll figure it out later, and I can see it within the context of the film. There's like it goes into some other space, and I don't know what it is yet, but I'll have fun with that and then come back. So it's all about kind of contrast and rhythm and variation, and I don't know, like building the world of the film. Yeah, it's all very much connected. I mean, that's the difference between making an animated film and just writing a story, isn't it? Is you've got these other dimensions you're playing with, time and sound and just visual space, and that the visuals and the words kind of complement each other, and you can subvert expectations. So
Say that
yeah.
you found it as well in that regard, that the same as you, Rory. I found notebooks are quite, or sketchbooks are quite linear, so I need to have separate paper in order to move it. And especially when I'm going through the creative process, I do like to just do the sketch quickly. I'm not saying I'm not as good. I'm not good at all on drawing and animation, but when it comes to those places, just having those little elements to visualize things to help us to see how it's going to look like and how we can actually use them, that might be a good thing. I am also really curious about your work, Ellie, when you're talking about nonfiction and documentaries. How do you use the storyboarding for those as well? So if you can tell us a bit more, which is leads to our next question about the workflow of the storyboarding in general.
Yeah. So often, I interview say there's a person in the film, I'll interview them. But, for like a 5-minute film, I might have 2 hours of interview. So then I need to do an edit, and I'll do that myself to kind of get it down to like a rough timeline. And then I'll have a go at doing the thumbnails or really quick drawings. I usually then jump into Photoshop because I find it really quick to use. Sometimes I might use Procreate, but I quite like Photoshop because then that works nicely with Premiere. So I can quickly update files and they'll change in the Premiere file. So in that file, you'll have the audio and then these very rough JPEG kind of thumbnail shots in there. Then I'll share that with the lead animator and editor. So lead animator, I'm talking to about kind of performance and kind of what's happening in that shot and the emotions that I want to convey. And then working with the editor is very much about sort of, getting the story through and working on that pacing and figuring out the beats. And then I'll go back to a more sort of rigorous storyboarding process. And I'll probably have like character design sheets by then and an idea of environments. So I can then create an animatic that is getting closer to what I'd like to look like. Sometimes I use like 3D modeling to sort of understand environments, especially if I think it's maybe a bit of a mental block for me. Like I find it really hard to think about um different shot compositions, and how the character will maybe go through an environment. Like the last film I made was all set underwater, so kind of thinking about seascapes underwater. So I might use something like Blender just to think about different ways of creating that environment in 3D and placing the camera in different places. Sometimes I'll just do that as like bits of cardboard to try and work that out as well. Um, so it's quite a big part of the process. I sort of feel like the animatic stage needs the most investment, because that's where you can try things out, you can fail, you can communicate. I mean, this is on personal projects. I think on commercial projects, you don't really have the time for this. You're sort of working in a more linear direction. But in terms of like trying out different things and really crafting the film, that animatic stage is really kind of important. And I think is obviously something that's very different to live action, where you find that in the edit at the end a little bit more. And so yeah, it can take quite a long time and a lot of back and forth.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Up to now, we talk slightly about your own creative work and storyboarding and how you're using it. But I know some of you actually work with the other people to do the storyboarding for them. So you're getting a script or concept art or commercials or anything like this. How do you approach that? Because when you do your own creative work, you play with that flexibility. When you receive a script, that you need to be faithful with it, how to deal with it. Just going to give you an example as well. I work as a cinematographer in commercial most of the time. So a lot of the storyboards come to us. So I don't necessarily have an input in those storyboards. It is very annoying. I'm not going to say it's not. I'd like to be creative. I like to play with these things. But at the end, I understand that it's a vision of the director that need to be produced there. How do you reach that? What kind of workflow you go through it in order to produce the vision of the director in the storyboards?
Yeah, well, for commercials and commissions, I'm quite lucky in a way that usually somebody has approached me because they've already seen my previous work. So there's already an expectation of style, I suppose, or like personal style they're going to get, which is helpful. So there's no surprises and I don't have to try and, really change my work. So for me, it would usually be sort of quite 2D, cartoony, character-based. So that's good because it means the concept is probably already within, similar to something they've seen me make before. And then yeah, working with a script, I find it easier in a way than personal projects because you can have that distance from it. And you can lean into the idea that this isn't maybe the place for complete experimentation. It's collaborative, and it's really nice when you're working with someone who you just trust, and they trust you, and there's that freedom, and you're on the same page. Then it can be really fun, I think, to try things out. And I'd usually maybe make a few style frames before boarding the whole thing. Just be like, this is what these key shots will look like. Once that kind of gets signed off, you can figure it out sequentially. And yeah, then I'd usually put a bit more time into actually making the boards look closer to the finished thing and just be a bit more organized with it, design a really nice layout, very professional in a way that I wouldn't do with my own work. But then it's nice and you have this artifact and that becomes, you go for a few rounds of trying stuff out. And then, yeah, I'll stick it on the timeline as soon as possible. Sometimes they'll send the voice recording already if there is a dialogue, and that's really helpful, or at least a temp track. Like the earliest I can start to time it out, the better, really. But I think it's helpful when you're pitching on these things or those initial conversations. I think having a mood board of references and trying to draw from lots of different places, not just animated ads, but cinema, illustration, fine art, like the more varied the kind of your inspirations are, I think that's really helpful to figure out a new kind of visual language for the project.
Excellent. You also, Chris, you mentioned that you're using Animat sometimes, and then Ellie, you mentioned that you're using Premiere Pro sometimes and some other tools as well. When it comes to the commercial mainly, do you guys use hand drawing or using a specific kind of animation tools for the storyboarding or combination of both?
Shall I go? Yeah, yeah. No, for me, I tend to use Animate CC a lot because it's really fast when I'm storyboarding. But I think, yeah, and I tend to put that into Premiere, so I work that way. I always work digital most of the time. But it's interesting talking about what we were saying about working with other directors, other people, other ways of working. I tend to do my own stuff mainly. But when I have directed commercials in other people's styles, then I always find that quite interesting. That there's always like the point when you're working with an ad agency where you have to, there's a point where they're going to trust you. Do you know what I mean? I always remember, or every time I've done things like the Milky Bar Kid or like different, like very strong products, that they're always terrified. They're always like really picky about the design of the character. And the slices thing, they're going, it's not a tough character, it's off character. And then there's like a point, I think, when you do commercials where they've got to trust you and then they see it moving. I always like to do an animation test on a commercial. Then when they see it move and they go, oh, actually, yeah, no, this is it, because it's like a dangerous time when you start to do a storyboard based on somebody's illustration and it doesn't. You know what I mean? They start to think, oh, it doesn't look like the character. Do you lot have that as well?
Yeah. Yeah, it feels like that's a big part of those projects is sort of earning the trust and kind of being able to um communicate between of that gap between an animatic and a final animation, and like it's quite a hard thing to communicate to some clients, and and doing that through concept artwork, or I think you're right, animation tests really help that as well. But still I find it's almost like they've forgotten that it's eventually going to end up like this. But yeah, it's trust is sort of a big thing, but I do like that kind of relief you get at the end when everyone's actually really pleased with it.
Yeah, that is a good point. Well,
Yeah.
yeah, having it that I don't know that not a knowledge gap, but that fear that they think if you send something unfinished, you have to constantly caveat like this is, you assume it's obvious that the face hasn't been animated or something,
Yeah,
and
that's
then
it.
you'll get a note back, be like, the face is a bit stiff there. So, yep, that's
And you
not
can
been
do
done.
that, can't you? And just do send something like that's not quite finished, and then you have weeks of then trying to claw that back.
Yeah.
You lose their trust a bit. Where they're going, oh no, no. Or like I always working with ad agencies. Sometimes you get some really radical creative partners, and they'll say, and you draw the character with a smiley face, and then they go, "Oh no, we don't want a smiley face. We want them to be grimacing." And you're saying to them, "But no, actually, but they're going to be smiling." And then no, no, we want a grimacing. And then you go to the client, the product, and then they're like going, "Oh my God, no, we want it to be smiling." And it's like you knew, like yeah, all these debates about like yeah, it sounds daft, but if you have a moody looking character, it could blow the job for you, or if something's half finished with an advert, it is funny, isn't it?
This, on that note, actually, how do you manage those debates and disagreements and discussions? Sometimes you need to step back. Sometimes, at least it is for me, sometimes I need to push ideas. Sometimes I need to step back. So how do you manage that? How do you think that you're keeping a good relationship and professional relationship still you being heard?
I feel if you've got a good producer, they'll shield you from a lot of these comments you don't want to hear. But yeah, that's if you're doing direct to client stuff, then I think that becomes. I mean, often I'm quite lucky that a lot of those jobs I end up working with the same people, and you like because you get on and it's just easy and you understand each other, so you form these relationships that are really helpful. Uh, yeah, I don't know, but I was also just being honest and being mature about it. Like if something's going wrong on your end, you have to communicate that as soon as possible. If they're misunderstanding something, clarify. Yeah, it's communication really. That's
Yeah.
just
I think
Excellent.
clarify is a good word. So often they might, like a client might say, I want this, but I've learned to sort of go back and say, well, do you mean this or do you mean this? And it might not be either of those. But before I go ahead and draw something, let's just really try and sort of like nail it down. Or even like it can be very specific. So I work with a lot of charities and you know, stuff about the representation of people and uh you know, so getting like lots of kind of sign-off points, so getting characters signed off before you go to animate just to check. But there's definitely times like where Chris was saying where the client's saying one thing, then they share it with someone wider in the organization, they say something else, and probably going back to the first thing you did anyway.
Yeah, but I think it's always about moving. Then there's always a moment where they see it moving, and then they go, "Oh yeah, that's good. That is." And it's like, I mean, that's another thing with storyboards. Like in the old days of advertising, when we used to do like loads of when the process was slower and you had like 2 weeks to do a storyboard for commercial. You
Mm.
know, there was always that thing about like when you know people would spend a long time with the storyboards and then they fall in love with them a bit, you know what I mean? And you had to break that psychological thing of when they saw it moving, then they'd be all right. But it was always like it was all up for grabs until that bit.
Mm.
Excellent. You know, based on experience I had in the discussion with other people as well, actually a storyboarding is a good way to breaking the creative block. So sometimes when you're writing, actually, it is because it's too linear, it creates more creative block than a storyboarding. Uh, but during the process of your creative work and even the storyboarding, if you hit with a creative block, if you cannot think of something, if you're doing something that you think there should be a better way to do it, uh, how do you manage that? What do you do in that process in order to break that block?
I always just go out or something, go to the art gallery or do something. Or to be honest, though, I don't really ever get like that. I tend to just sit and draw and I don't. I think the writer's block might come with the script part more than the storyboarding because I would have. So I tend to do a script first and then do storyboards. What about you, Law?
yes.
Yeah,
Sorry.
sorry. You go ahead, Rory.
Yeah, I was similar really. I don't I think by the time I've started boarding, I'm probably fairly committed and have a lot of it in my head already. Like I tend to sort of think a lot before drawing anything. And like I'll doodle, but this will be so messy. Then when I come down, I try and do it as quick as possible, really. And if it's from a like I've been given a script and it's a commission project, often it depends how interesting the script is really. Like you could do the very obvious thing and do a very literal interpretation of the words they're saying. That might be the first pass and you realize that's incredibly boring and try to find some kind of metaphor or interesting animation concept to tie these threads together and not just repeat the words that are being said on the screen. With my own films, it's different really because each project I like to play with a different kind of way of telling the story, I suppose, but using the animation rather than just, yeah, you don't want it to be just like here's a drawing for that sentence, here's a drawing for that sentence.
Hmm.
Excellent. Do you want to add something, Ellie? Sorry.
I tend to I tend to like probably go back to watching films or so as I mentioned the film that's set underwater. I watched that film, The Octopus Teacher. Have you seen that on Netflix? I think I watched it about 4 times. But it was really good for sort of like cinematography underwater and sort of understanding how um how the light works underwater and how the seaweed moves and things like that. And I use Miro as well, like as a kind of way of collecting images and collecting short clips. So that really helped me out of that particular block that I had around kind of thinking about how do I animate water, which is actually, I think, one of the hardest things we do for animators to do. But yeah, so yeah, often sort of like looking at films or looking at other animations as well is really useful for me.
Excellent. Gonna go away from the animation from a storyboarding for a bit. Gonna talk slightly. I'm gonna ask you actually about telling us what projects coming up for you guys. There we go.
Yeah, shall I go first? No, yeah, I've just finished my debut graphic novel. I'm just started writing the sequel, so I'm working on that at the minute. And I've sort of I've written the script, and now I've just sort of just working on it, just working through sequence by sequence. So that's me really.
Excellent. Ellie?
So I am sort of in between projects as well. So I have a piece of work that we've had some like research and development funding for. So we've kind of been testing it, but it's sort of animated visuals with body detection technology. So I've been working with an artist called Lucy Wheeler on this. So it's sort of thinking about storytelling, but in a non-linear format, and how do we kind of bring those kind of documentary stories into this space. So it's been really fun to sort of experiment and try out different ideas and think about how sort of like using your body and understanding story through your body. And how, yeah, so basically I'm sort of moving on to the next phase of that, which is sort of developing more of a specific narrative, and then also looking at developing a VR version of a short film that I made called Plunge. So sort of reusing those 2D assets in 3D space. And so again, sort of some R&D funding around that, but also looking at like bringing together animated documentary storytelling with well-being techniques in VR. So there's a lot of breathing and kind of yeah, I don't know if anyone's done any like meditation in VR before. It's quite interesting. So sort of bringing that into the storytelling experience. Yeah, and my exciting project that I just finished was a projection mapping project onto a camper van. So working with kids to make stop motion animation, and then their animations were projected and wrapped around a van at a sort of night experience. So I'd love to do more of those.
Excellent. Rory?
I've just finished a short film, which I was chipping away at in between jobs for the last couple of years, so it's done now. But now I've got a couple other shorts I want to make, so it's kind of I'll probably pick one of those and just start making it, because I think I've gotten in the habit now of having kind of smaller ideas and wanting to make things quicker actually, and not have to wait for funding and spend a lot of time pitching and waiting and having meetings, and then I could have made a film in the time it took to do the development. So yeah, I think I like the idea of making smaller projects that maybe just shove them straight online, see what happens, little comedy bits. But I'm currently writing at the moment, co-writing a feature film, and yeah, pitching an animated series and a live action comedy series in development. So a lot of waiting around with these long-term things. So I feel like want to just keep making stuff. But and yeah, and teaching. I really enjoyed this. Interesting, we will teach, and I find that actually quite an important part of my process in a way, because it keeps you excited and engaged, and meeting all these incredible young people who are like enthusiastic and want to make stuff. And I feel like that's quite useful for my own work to feed off that energy.
There's all of us work at the higher education sector for part of our work as well. So it's just so fascinating to see that we have a story to tell, and we are teachers there to help people to tell their stories and reach their vision that they want. But sometimes just see that they come with some ideas that you couldn't ever think. It's just quite a learning process for yourself as well. So I do appreciate that. Some of the questions are coming in. I'm going to ask those questions and then go back to our question as well. Danielle asked that how much do you think about the mechanism of performance in a scene with when it's storyboarding? So there's an example as well. What actions the character might need to be able to perform or thinking of a stop motion or physical steps, how easily will be access or place the camera, etc.
I think in the thumbnail process, I'm probably thinking more about where the camera is rather than performance. But when I get to that sort of second stage of a more thorough storyboard, this is for my own work, then that's when the performance comes in. But I'm very lucky to work with animators who are super talented, and so the last person I worked with is called Hannah Brewerton, and she's got this amazing approach to performance that I could never animate in the way that she does. So I think at some point that becomes more collaborative in my making, because I'll sort of storyboard it out, but then we'll have a discussion about the performance, and she might find a reference video, and we were like, actually, this might be quite nice, and then we sort of work more on sort of keyframes in that sense.
It's interesting.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, sorry. Go on, Chris.
And Chris?
Oh no, I was going to echo what Ellie's saying, but I think it's like, depends, doesn't it? You want to give the actor or the animator something to take away, something that they can add to. So yeah, the thumbnail stage is just thinking more about the story. But then if it's live action, I mean, if you're shooting a live action scene, and you have to keep your mind open, because when you're presented with what the set is, or the situation might be quite different from what you've storyboarded, and sometimes you can't follow the storyboard to the letter without having a lot of money. So to build exactly the thing would be too problematic. So you have to keep your mind open. But yeah, but for animation, yeah, I think you just set it out. I mean, I remember once I worked with one animator, and who was really specific when I was animating for him, and he said the character blinks one blink here, half a blink, then opens his eyes for 6 frames and closes his eyes for 2 frames, and it went on like this, and he just went through. But I won't say who it is, in a very specific way, and I remember like thinking, well, I don't want to work like that as a director. I think the way Ellie works, is to set the parameters for the scene and think about like what the emotion is or what you want to say with the scene, and then let the animator run with it, and let them bring something new, because it's about spontaneity, isn't it? All filmmaking is about spontaneity, but.
Yeah.
But like in live action, you've got to create a scene out of the moment, with the actors, and it has to be spontaneous. But with animation, you do that over 3 months. So then you have to keep it alive, over 3 months, because it. So you have to give people the freedom to explore the idea as well. I think being a director.
Excellent.
Yeah, definitely. It's really nice to collaborate with people who can do something that you can't, or you want everyone to play to their strengths. So if I'm making a film, I know I'm going to do everything, then I'll have that in my head, and I'll put in the things that I like to do and the things that I'm better at, and find sort of shortcuts to maybe not include certain kinds of animation that I'm just slower at or not as good at. So I think there is an awareness of performance, but it depends project to project. Like, you don't want to sort of limit yourself at the very early stages, because I think it's good to say, what is like best case scenario? What do I want to do? And then you figure out, how do I do that given the limitations of budget, deadline, whatever you're working with. And to look at the whole thing holistically, like if you've got a really complex shot where there's a character moving around space, jumping, doing all sorts of, full body animation, how long is that going to take? And does that mean that some other shots will have to be much stripped down, And I think there's a way to do that and without anybody actually noticing. So, I mean, especially when you're starting out, there's a tendency for everything to be like 100% all the time, and then you sort of bite off more than you can chew. But you can, 3/4 of your film could be quite still and not much actually animated.
Or cut to a closer shot and get rid of the legs so they're not walking. Stuff
Definitely.
like that.
Just a mid-shot walk cycle, just to that.
I suppose that's another point, isn't it? Like storyboards and animatics help us communicate to producers so they can, we can work out how long a shot's going to take and how many animators we need on that shot. So I suppose it can have that like budgetary tie-in as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We already talked for 40 minutes, 20 minutes left. So please send your questions to the streaming service in the chat, and then we're going to answer those things as well as soon as we get them. We had a pre-meeting before this panel discussions, and the AI always comes up in this kind of discussion. So we have our own views and different perspective and those things. So openly, let's discuss as well. How are we feeling about AI? Do you think it's going to be useful? Do you think it's going to be disruptive? Do you think it's going to be a combination of those things? I don't think so any of us actually encouraging people using AI in that sense at this moment of the time when it comes, especially for storyboarding as a method of thinking and method of developing creative ideas. But what's your thought in general? And new tools, AI? Can we start with you, Rory?
Yeah, I feel I got quite passionate in the last meeting. I don't know. I find like philosophically, existentially, I don't like that people are going to become so reliant on tech companies outsourcing their thought process. I think there's already a backlash to that. But I'm not, I've used AI to help code things actually more than I actually used it to vibe code. Horrible word. Like a storyboarding web app that I was using just to move images around, and like it's not something I would ever release to the public because it's really shoddy, but it works for me. And I don't know. I'm in two minds about that. But for generative AI, I see why it's fun for people who are too lazy to learn how to draw to create some images. Like I'm not the greatest drafts person, and but I don't find satisfaction from getting AI to draw for me. I don't find it doesn't feel like I'm being creative. It doesn't feel like I'm communicating my ideas at all, really. It's different if you're touching things up or for VFX and things like that. These tools, I see that more in like the lineage of computer tools being used for those kind of processes anyway. But for ideation or for creating visuals, I personally don't find it satisfying, and I don't see any real merit in someone using that in that way. I don't think it's your work. But I don't know.
I think as well we were talking about how when I talk to people who do work in VR and storyboards, and then the trouble with AI is that is people use it to generate content like storyboards or temporary shots for films. And it's like when you get a temp track when you put like temporary music on, you fall in love with it. And then the danger is that people start using the AI and they fall in love with it, or the clients fall in love with it. But then they have no idea how it was made because the AI, you don't know how. It's not something that's been physically made, so you can't unpick it. And then quite often people use AI and create setups that are unmakeable, like that are super complicated with lots of detail, and so then you can't unpick. You have to unpick that with the animation. And I suppose by the time you've attempted to do that, you could have just drew it anyway. But I think there's that people are making things that are unmakeable using it, and then they end up in a pickle because it'll cost millions of quid or something. Does anybody else have that experience or?
Yeah, I've had a few in a slightly different way. I've had a few experiences where clients give me a script that's obviously been written in AI, and I sort of say this won't work as an animation because it's not been written as a like thinking of animation as a visual document. But they've been very uh they've stood their ground, and they haven't wanted anything changed within the script, and the script is there's too much in it for it to be like a 1 minute film or however it's going to be. So it's the same. You can't realize it because it's been there's too much in it, and yeah, that is a bit of a problem, and I've seen that a few times now.
Especially for creative thinking, humans, especially creatives, are critical thinkers. So that element of the having your own experience, seeing other works, bring them together and have an extraction of it. That's what the AI may not be able to do, in my view, as well. So AI works based on the information that exists. It doesn't relate between the collaboration of information to create something new out of it, and that's what the biggest issues, at least we see in a creative industry by using AI. I do the same as a Rory. I'm quite skeptic about it, but the other hand as well, I think that has its own benefits at period of the time. I'm using it for any After Effects works I'm doing. Maybe I'm using it sometimes for coding. So the coding I need for the After Effects, or if I have a medical condition. So before going to the doctor, maybe just check what are my options are. So it's the wrong thing to do, but it might have some elements in those things. But I think for creative outcome, it's just removing that exposure, removing that element of the personality and critical thinking is something not that it can do, really.
Yeah. I do use AI. I don't like it for generating images and videos, and maybe that's just me being selfish because that's my field, Maybe that's unfair on all the programmers that I'm using it to code. Maybe I am equally part of the problem. Like, but I would never use it to release an app because I'm not a professional, I'm not an expert in that. But for learning software and stuff like that, it's like a really clever Google. I find it quite helpful. But and actually for brainstorming,
Yeah.
I have, if you're really like you don't know what to do, you can just like give me 100 terrible words and they'll all be bad, but you can kind of fight it. I don't know. And then as long as you have this awareness that this is mad, you're talking to a computer. It's like you have an out of body experience. Like this is like a few years ago was kind of sci-fi. But I don't know. I find that kind of fun sometimes to try and break it. And I think the problem is it's like I'm not talking to a computer, I'm talking to a company. Like I don't see all of the censorship, all of the hidden rules that either Google or OpenAI or whoever it is have imposed. That's not the technology. You're not talking to a conscious being. You're talking to this thing that's been filtered through a corporation. Once they start putting adverts in it, it's just horrible.